Welcome to English Stories, a place where emotions meet simple English. Subscribe to improve your English while listening to powerful life stories. Imagine marrying a stranger you have never met before. Imagine walking into a life you don't even know. This is my story. The story of a young girl who married a man she had never seen, and how that first night changed everything. My name is Ayesha. I am just a simple girl, born and raised in a small village where life is not easy, but still beautiful in its own way. My father is a farmer. He works day and night in the fields, under the burning sun, just to put food on our table. My mother is a housewife. She spends her entire life taking care of us, cooking, cleaning, and making sure the home feels warm even when money is not there. I grew up watching my parents struggle, but they always gave us love. I have two younger brothers, and as the oldest daughter, I always felt a deep responsibility. I never had big dreams like city girls. I never thought of studying abroad or becoming someone famous. For me, life was about simple happiness, eating with my family, helping my mother in the kitchen, and hearing my father's tired but loving voice at night when he returned from the fields. But as I grew older, my life started to change. In our village, people believe that when a girl reaches a certain age, she must be married. I was barely 20 when my relatives began whispering to my parents, "When will you marry Ayesha? She is a grown woman now." I could see the worry in my father's eyes. He wanted to protect me, but traditions were stronger than his desires. One evening, my mother sat beside me. She placed her hand on my head and said softly, "Ayesha, your father and I have found a proposal for you." My heart began to beat faster. Marriage? Already? I had never even thought about it. I asked her quietly, "Who is he?" My mother looked away and said, "He is a good man. He works in the city. His family is respected. We believe he will take care of you." I wanted to ask more. I wanted to know his name, his face, his voice, anything. But in our family, daughters do not always get the right to question. My parents believed they were doing the best for me, and I did not want to hurt them by saying no. So I nodded, with fear hiding in my heart. The truth is, I had never even met the man I was going to marry. Not once. I had no idea what his smile looked like, what kind of person he was, or if he would ever care about me. All I knew was what people told me. He is responsible. He earns well. He will give you a better life than this village. The wedding was simple but emotional. My father borrowed money to arrange it. I still remember the tears in his eyes as he blessed me. My mother hugged me so tightly, as if she was afraid to let me go. I was dressed as a bride, but inside I was just a scared girl being sent into an unknown life. The night of my marriage came. My heart was heavy. My hands were trembling. I was now the wife of a man I had never met. The first night after marriage is supposed to be special for many girls, but for me, it was filled with fear, confusion, and sadness. When I entered the room, he was sitting there. For the first time, I saw the man who was now my husband. His face was serious. His eyes did not look at me with warmth. Instead, they seemed distant, almost cold. I sat quietly, not knowing what to say. My mind was racing with questions. Does he like me? Will he talk to me? Will he be kind? But the night did not go as I had secretly hoped. There was no gentle conversation, no smile to ease my fear. He spoke very little, and when he did, his words felt heavy. I could sense that he was not happy either. Maybe he too had not wanted this marriage. Maybe he too had been forced by his family. I lay awake that night, tears filling my eyes, asking myself, is this how my new life begins? I thought of my parents. I thought of my father, who worked so hard to marry me into a better life. I thought of my mother, who trusted that I would be safe. I could not tell them that my first night was not what they imagined. I could not break their hearts. That night, I realized something. Life does not always give us what we dream of. Sometimes it gives us tests, trials, and challenges. And maybe this marriage was going to be my biggest test. But I also knew something else. I was not going to give up. I was my father's daughter. I had his strength in my blood. If my husband did not welcome me with love, I would try to build that love with patience. If life was going to be hard, I would find a way to make it beautiful. Because in the end, we do not choose where we are born. We do not always choose whom we marry. But we can choose how we live, how we fight, and how we rise from the pain. This was only the beginning of my story. The morning after my wedding felt heavy. I opened my eyes in a strange room, with walls I had never seen before, in a house that was no longer my father's home. I was a wife now. The word itself felt strange on my tongue. I looked around, but my husband was not there. He had left early for work, without even saying much to me. I sat on the bed, staring at my hands decorated with fading henna. I remembered how my cousins had laughed and written his name hidden inside the designs. Last night, when I looked at it, I felt shy. But now, that same name felt like a stranger's mark on my skin. The first few days were the hardest. His family was kind to me, but I still felt like an outsider. Every sound in the house was new. Every corner felt unfamiliar. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the silence, missing the sound of my father's cough, my mother's voice calling my name, and my brother's laughter. Here, I felt like I did not belong. My husband hardly spoke to me. When he did, his words were short, like instructions. Make tea. Keep this here. Don't do that. There was no warmth. No smile. No kindness. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to know if he was angry about this marriage, if he had loved someone else before, if he even wanted me here. But every time I opened my mouth, fear stopped me. What if he shouted? What if he left me? What if he told me he never wanted me in his life? One night, I gathered courage. I asked him softly, "Are you happy with this marriage?" He looked at me for a moment and then said coldly, "We don't always get what we want in life, but we must learn to live with it." His words broke me. I felt like a burden he was forced to carry. But deep inside, I told myself something. Ayesha, you are not weak. You cannot let this pain destroy you. I remembered my father's words before I left home. He held my hands and said, "Daughter, marriage is not only about happiness. It is about patience, respect, and strength. There will be days when you will cry, but remember, your tears should make you stronger, not weaker." So I decided to be strong. Instead of waiting for him to change, I began to change myself. Every morning, I woke up early, cleaned the house, and helped his mother in the kitchen. At first, I did it because it was expected, but later, I realized it gave me peace. Keeping myself busy stopped me from thinking too much. His family began to like me, even if my husband didn't. There were days when I felt completely broken. Nights when I cried silently into my pillow, wishing I could run back to my parents' home. But then I thought about them. My father had borrowed money for my wedding. My mother had trusted that I would build a good life. How could I return to them with empty hands and a broken heart? No, I had to stand tall. I began to write in a small notebook I kept hidden under my pillow. Every night, I wrote my feelings, my pain, and my little hopes. Writing became my friend. I wrote things I could never say to anyone. Some nights, I even wrote letters to my husband, letters I never gave him. Letters where I told him how much I wanted to be loved, how much I wanted him to see me not as a stranger, but as his partner. One evening, I made tea and quietly placed it in front of him. He was reading something on his phone, lost in his world. I sat nearby, waiting. He didn't even look at me. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "He doesn't see me. But one day he will. I will not give up until he does." Slowly, I began to notice small things about him. He worked long hours. He came home tired. Sometimes his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Maybe he was under pressure. Maybe his silence was not because he hated me, but because he was fighting his own battles. That thought gave me strength. Instead of feeling unwanted, I decided to become his support, even if he did not ask for it. So when he came home late, I kept dinner ready. When his clothes needed ironing, I did it without being told. I made sure he never had to search for anything in the house. It wasn't easy. At times, I felt like I was giving and giving, without receiving even a smile in return. But I told myself, a good seed takes time to grow. Maybe one day, my patience will bring fruit. And then slowly, something began to change. One night, after weeks of silence, he looked at me and said softly, "Thank you for the food." It was such a small sentence, but for me, it was like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. I went to bed with a smile that night. From that day, little by little, he began to speak more. Sometimes about his work, sometimes about small things. I listened carefully, never interrupting. I wanted him to know that I was there, not just as his wife, but as his friend. It wasn't perfect. There were still many cold days, many nights when I cried. But those little moments, those few words of kindness, gave me hope. In my heart, I knew something. Marriages are not built in one night. They are built in patience, in silence, in small acts of love that one day turn into trust. I had married a man I never met, and our beginning was painful. But maybe, just maybe, this story could have a different ending than the one I feared. Because sometimes love is not found. It is created. And I was ready to create it. Time passed slowly, like drops of water falling into an empty jar. Each day felt long, yet each night felt even longer. My husband and I lived in the same house, but it often felt like we were worlds apart. He spoke to me, yes, but only in short sentences. Sometimes he seemed lost in his own world, carrying a burden I could not see. At first, his silence cut me deeply. I often asked myself, why am I here? What is the meaning of this marriage if there is no love? But then I remembered something my mother always told me. Daughter, life is not always what you dream of. Sometimes life is what you build with your hands. So I decided to build. I began to take small steps toward making this house my home. I decorated the rooms with little touches, a flower vase here, a clean curtain there. I cooked meals with love, even if he did not always notice. And most importantly, I worked on myself. I read books, wrote in my diary, and prayed for strength. But inside, the storm was still there. There were nights when I cried silently, hiding my face in the pillow so no one could hear. Sometimes I wondered if my husband even saw my pain. Did he know how lonely I was? Or was I invisible to him? One day, I finally gathered courage and asked him, "Why don't you talk to me? Why do you keep everything inside?" He looked at me for a long moment, and then sighed. His words were sharp but honest. Because I never wanted this marriage. My parents forced me. I don't even know you. How do you expect me to suddenly accept everything? His words pierced my heart like a knife. I felt the ground slip under my feet. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to tell him how much it hurt. But I stayed silent. I went into my room, sat on the floor, and cried until my eyes swelled. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "He doesn't want me, but I will not let that destroy me. I am more than someone's unwanted wife. I am my father's daughter, my mother's pride. If he cannot see my worth today, one day he will. And if he never does, I will still shine." Those words became my promise to myself. From that day, my tears became less and my determination grew stronger. Instead of chasing his attention, I focused on building my own strength. I learned new recipes so I could surprise his family. I started stitching clothes to earn a little money, just so I wouldn't have to ask him for small things. I found joy in the little victories, when his mother praised my cooking, when the neighbor asked me to sew a dress, when his younger sister hugged me and said, "Bobby, you're so kind." And then something unexpected happened. One evening, when he came home from work, he saw me sewing clothes. He asked, "Why are you doing this?" I smiled and said, "Because I don't want to sit idle. I want to do something with my time." For the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Maybe even respect. He didn't say anything, but I could feel something shift. Over time, those little shifts grew. He began to notice me more. When I served food, he sometimes said, "This tastes good." When I ironed his clothes, he said quietly, "Thank you." These were small words, but to me they were like gold. But even as things started to improve, I knew I couldn't depend only on him for my happiness. I had to create my own. I realized something important. In life, no one else is responsible for your joy. You are. If you keep waiting for someone else to complete you, you will always remain incomplete. So I found happiness in small things. Watching the sun rise from the balcony. Talking to children in the neighborhood. Reading stories in the little books I managed to buy. Every day, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. Today, I lived for myself too. Months passed, and slowly my husband's coldness began to thaw. One night, when he came home, he looked tired and frustrated. Instead of staying silent, I gently asked, "Rough day?" To my surprise, he actually talked. He told me about his office problems, about the pressure he faced, about how sometimes he felt trapped in responsibilities. That was the first real conversation we had. It wasn't about love or marriage. It was simply about life. But for me, it was a beginning. After that, he began sharing little things now and then. Sometimes about his work, sometimes about his past. I listened without judgment. I realized that just like me, he too had wounds. Maybe he didn't want this marriage, but he too was stuck in a life he hadn't chosen. We were both prisoners of circumstance. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "We are two strangers forced into a bond. But maybe, just maybe, we can turn this bond into something more. Not because fate gave it to us, but because we decide to make it work." Looking back now, I understand something. Marriage is not about perfection. It's not about instant love or magical first nights or fairy tales. Marriage is about two people learning to live together, with all their flaws, fears, and scars. It is about patience, about giving when you feel empty, about believing when everything seems lost. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, I will not give up. Not on myself. Not on this marriage. Not on the possibility of love. Because sometimes love is not about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person. And I was ready to become that person. Life slowly began to take a new shape. My husband was still not the man I had dreamed of, but at least he was no longer a stranger. He spoke to me more often now, not with love, but with respect. And to me, that respect meant everything. It was a doorway, a small opening, through which I hoped love might one day enter. But marriage is never without challenges. There were days when he still grew cold and distant, shutting me out completely. Sometimes he came home angry, slamming doors, refusing to eat, refusing to talk. At first, these days broke me all over again. I wanted to cry, to ask him why he was treating me this way. But then, I remembered something I had promised myself. Do not fight darkness with more darkness. Fight it with light. So instead of arguing, I stayed calm. I quietly placed his food on the table, left water by his bedside, and gave him space. Some nights he ignored it all, but other nights, I saw him eat when he thought I wasn't watching. It was enough for me. One evening, his anger was worse than usual. He had fought with someone at work, and when he came home, he shouted at me for no reason. My heart shook and tears burned my eyes. But I didn't answer back. I simply whispered, I am sorry your day was so hard. My voice trembled, but my words were gentle. For a moment, his face softened. He didn't apologize, but he also didn't shout again. And in that silence, I felt a small victory. I realized something that night. Sometimes people don't need arguments, they need understanding. Over the weeks, my patience began to show results. He still wasn't affectionate, but he started noticing me more. Once I was coughing badly while cooking. He came into the kitchen and said, Go sit down, I'll finish this. I was shocked. He had never done such a thing before. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like the first drop of rain after a long drought. His family also began to see the changes in me. His mother told me one day, You have a strong heart, Ayesha. This house feels lighter since you came. Her words gave me courage. But my journey was not just about my husband or his family. It was about me too. I had learned something very powerful. When life doesn't give you what you want, you can still create something meaningful out of what you have. I started teaching children in the neighborhood. Most of them were poor, unable to go to proper schools. I gathered them in our courtyard every afternoon and taught them how to read and write. At first, it was only 2 or 3 children. Then more came. Soon, I had 10 children sitting around me, laughing, learning, and filling the air with energy. Teaching them gave me joy. It made me feel alive. It reminded me that even if my marriage wasn't perfect, I still had a purpose. My heart was no longer empty. It was full of hope because I was making a difference in someone's life. And slowly, my husband began to notice this too. One evening, when he came home early, he saw me teaching the children. He stood there quietly watching. Later, he asked me, Why do you do this? I smiled and said, Because they need someone. And because it makes me happy. He didn't reply, but I saw something new in his eyes. Maybe respect. Maybe admiration. Or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, it gave me strength to keep going. Still, there were days of struggle. Nights when loneliness returned, when I longed for a gentle touch, a caring word, or simply to be held. But instead of drowning in sadness, I told myself, Ayesha, you are building something bigger than yourself. Your patience today will be your strength tomorrow. And I was right. One day, my husband came home late. He looked exhausted, more than usual. I placed food on the table, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he sat quietly, staring at the floor. For the first time, I felt brave enough to ask, Do you want to talk? At first, he said nothing. Then slowly, he began to speak. He told me about the weight he carried, about the pressure from his job, about how he sometimes felt trapped in a life that wasn't his choice. Listening to him, I finally understood. Just like me, he too was living a life he hadn't chosen. Just like me, he too was struggling in silence. That night, something changed between us. For the first time, I wasn't just his wife. I was his companion. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't suddenly become affectionate. But he began to share little pieces of himself with me. And those pieces were precious to me, because they were real. I realized then that love doesn't always come like a storm, fast and wild. Sometimes it comes like dawn, slow, gentle, and almost invisible until suddenly, you realize the darkness has faded. And maybe, just maybe dawn had begun in my life too. As I lay in bed that night, I placed my hand on my heart and whispered, "Patience is not weakness. It is strength, and strength always creates change." This was no longer just the story of a girl who married a man she never met. This was the story of a woman learning to turn pain into power, silence into strength, and emptiness into purpose. And my journey was far from over. Time has a strange way of healing wounds. It doesn't erase the scars, but it teaches you how to live with them. My marriage was still far from perfect, but something inside me had changed. I no longer felt like a helpless girl trapped in a life she didn't choose. I felt like a woman who had discovered her strength. My husband, too, was slowly changing. His words became softer. His anger became less frequent. He still wasn't expressive, but he began to notice the little things I did. If I cooked something new, he actually ate it with interest. If I was unwell, he would ask, "Did you take medicine?" It might sound small to others, but for me, each word felt like a step closer to the man I hoped he could be. But marriage is never a straight road. Just when I thought things were improving, life tested me again. One evening, he came home later than usual. His face was tired, but there was something else, something heavy in his eyes. He barely touched his food. After dinner, he said, "I might have to travel for work. It could be for months." My heart sank. Months. I had just started to feel a connection with him, and now he would be gone. I wanted to cry, to beg him not to leave me. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, "If it's for your work, you should go. I'll be fine here." He looked at me in surprise, as if he expected me to argue. But I didn't, because I knew love cannot grow in chains. If I wanted him to respect me, I had to respect his journey too. The day he left, I stood at the doorway, watching him walk away. My eyes filled with tears, but my heart whispered, "Be strong, Ayesha. This is another test." His absence was hard. The house felt emptier than before. But instead of drowning in loneliness, I poured myself into teaching the children. My little courtyard school became bigger. Parents from nearby lanes began sending their kids. Soon, I had 15 children sitting around me every afternoon, their voices filling the air with laughter and curiosity. Teaching them gave me purpose. It reminded me that I was not just someone's wife. I was a person who could change lives. Some children brought me flowers as gifts. Others hugged me tightly and said, "Teacher, we love you." Those words healed wounds that my marriage had created. And then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, my husband returned earlier than planned. I didn't even know he was coming back that day. I was sitting in the courtyard, surrounded by children, teaching them to read. When I looked up, I saw him standing at the gate, watching us. His expression was unreadable. After the children left, he walked in quietly and said, "So this is what you've been doing?" I nodded nervously. For a moment, I feared he might disapprove. But then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. "You're different, Ayesha. Stronger than I thought." Those words, they weren't romantic, but they were real. For the first time, I felt he saw me, not just as his wife, but as a woman with her own strength. After that day, something shifted between us. He began to sit with me in the evenings. Sometimes he asked about the children I taught. Sometimes he told me about his work. The conversations were simple, but they were bridges, connecting two hearts that had once been strangers. One night, as we were having tea, he said softly, "I didn't want this marriage in the beginning. I thought it was forced. But now, I'm beginning to think maybe it wasn't a mistake." Tears filled my eyes, but I quickly looked away so he wouldn't see. For months, I had waited to hear something like that. For months, I had given my heart without receiving anything back. And now, finally, my patience was bearing fruit. But I didn't let myself get lost in dreams. I knew love was not built in one moment. It was built in thousands of little moments, day after day. And I was willing to keep building. Still, challenges came. There were times when old habits returned, his silence, his anger, his distance. But instead of breaking me, those moments tested me. They reminded me that strength is not built in comfort, but in struggle. One evening, after an argument, I locked myself in the room and cried. I felt like giving up. Why am I fighting for a man who doesn't always value me? But then, I remembered the children's faces, the way they called me teacher, with so much love. I remembered my father's words before my wedding, telling me to be strong. And most importantly, I remembered the promise I had made to myself. Never give up on your worth. So I wiped my tears, opened the door, and walked out. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I simply continued with my life, holding my dignity like a crown. Days later, my husband came to me and said quietly, I'm sorry. Those 2 words may not sound like much, but for me, they were a treasure. Because they showed that even he was learning, even he was growing. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes love is not about big gestures. It's about growth. About 2 people learning to rise together, even if they start from broken places. My marriage was not a fairy tale. It was not perfect, but it was real. And in its struggles, I found my strength, my purpose, and my voice. As I lay in bed that night, with my husband sleeping beside me, I whispered in my heart, I married a man I never met. But maybe through patience and love, I am finally beginning to meet him. And that was worth everything. Perfect raising hands, let's complete the story with part 6, 1200 words. This final part will bring everything together. Her patience, struggles, strength, and how it transforms both her marriage and her life. Underscore 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 underscore. I married a man I never met. Part 6. Life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. When I married a man I had never met, I thought my story would be one of endless pain. I thought I would spend my life as a shadow in his world. But today, when I look back, I realize it was not just a marriage. It was a journey of discovering myself. The more I grew stronger, the more my husband began to change. He wasn't perfect, but he was no longer the cold stranger I had first met. He began to see me as more than a responsibility. Slowly, he began to see me as his partner. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, he asked me something I never expected. Ayesha, are you happy here? His question surprised me. For months, I had wanted him to care about my feelings, and now, finally, he did. I smiled and said honestly, I wasn't happy in the beginning. I felt unwanted, alone, and broken. But I chose not to give up. I chose to build my own strength. And today, I am not only happy, I am proud of the woman I have become. He looked at me quietly, then nodded. You're stronger than me, he whispered. I didn't see it before. But now I do. Those words were more valuable than diamonds. Because strength is not measured in power, it's measured in acknowledgement. And in that moment, he acknowledged me. But life still tested us. There were times when misunderstandings returned. Times when his silence hurt me. Times when I felt like I was giving more than I was receiving. But this time, I was no longer the weak girl who cried into her pillow every night. I was the woman who had built her own identity, who knew her worth, who could face storms without losing herself. My small courtyard school for children grew bigger. Neighbors began calling it Ayesha's class. Parents trusted me. Children loved me. Some of them even began to dream of becoming doctors and teachers. And every time they shared their dreams, I felt like I was planting seeds of hope in their hearts. One day, my husband came home early and saw the children gathered again. This time, instead of just watching from afar, he joined us. He sat beside the children, listened to them read, and even smiled at their mistakes. When they left, he turned to me and said, You've created something beautiful here. That was the first time he truly praised me. And I could see it in his eyes, pride. From then on, he began supporting me more. He bought me books for the children. He told his colleagues about my little school. Sometimes he even helped me arrange mats and notebooks for the students. For the first time, I felt like we were not just living under the same roof. We were building something together. Our relationship grew slowly, but steadily. There were no dramatic love stories, no fairy tale confessions. But there was respect, kindness, and partnership. And sometimes, respect lasts longer than love. One night, months later, he said something I had waited to hear for so long. We were sitting on the balcony, watching the stars, when he whispered, Ayesha, I know I wasn't a good husband in the beginning. I hurt you. I ignored you. I made you feel unwanted. But you never gave up on me. You never gave up on us. I don't know how to thank you for that. Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of healing. I placed my hand on his and said, I didn't give up because I believed. Not just in you, but in myself. I believed that patience can create love, and kindness can melt even the coldest hearts. He held my hand tighter and whispered, I may not have chosen you, but today, I can't imagine my life without you. That night, for the first time since my marriage, I felt truly seen, truly loved. Looking back, I realized something important. Many people believe marriage is about instant love, about sparks and fireworks. But real marriage is about patience, sacrifice, and building something slowly, brick by brick. I had married a man I had never met. My first night as his wife was filled with tears and pain. But today, I was living proof that even the hardest beginnings can lead to beautiful endings. And yet, the biggest lesson I learned was not about my husband. It was about myself. I learned that a woman is not weak just because she is gentle. I learned that silence can be stronger than shouting. I learned that patience is not about waiting. It's about how you behave while you wait. And most importantly, I learned that happiness does not always come from others. Sometimes you have to create it within yourself. Today, when I see the children in my courtyard reading with bright eyes, when I see my husband smiling as he drinks the tea I make, when I hear my parents' proud voices on the phone, I know that I did not fail. Yes, my marriage was not what I expected. But it gave me something far more valuable than I ever imagined. It gave me strength, purpose, and the courage to turn pain into power. So if you ask me now, Ayesha, what is your story? I will tell you this. I married a man I never met. My first night was not magical. It was filled with loneliness. My marriage was not built on instant love. It was built on tears, patience, and hope. But through it all, I discovered the strongest truth of all. When life does not give you the love you dream of, create the love you deserve. And that is what I did.